Okay, this is me back with another video. Today, I'm going to show you how to build a PC. And this is also the complete guide, so you know how to change or replace a part in your PC or completely build a new PC for someone else by the time you're done watching this video. So first, let's start things off with the parts we need. So the parts you are going to need to build a computer is these. You're going to need a CPU, you're going to need a GPU, you're going to need some RAM, you're going to need a SSD or storage, you're going to need a power supply, and most importantly, to put all these parts in, we're going to need a case. So let me show you what I mean by the parts, and I'll show you of what exact CPU and RAM and GPU you're going to need. Well, GPU you can pretty much select any, and RAM you can select any. But the thing is about RAM is if you get a motherboard that has DDR4, it says DDR4, then you want to get DDR4 RAM. And same thing, if your motherboard says it'll support DDR3, get the DDR3 RAM. But I definitely recommend getting DDR4 RAM, way faster. But the CPU is going to be a little bit tricky, so I'll teach you about that. So, if you're looking for a CPU that is easy to install, easy to find, and pretty much has a low price, well, I got the thing for you. You can use AMD's CPU. The reason why I choose those is because they're much simpler in general, and it's compatible with most motherboards these days. And the only thing you need to check is, like, for example, I got a Ryzen 5 4500, and it is AM4, it should say, yep, right there, AMD socket AM4, and this is not the new motherboard, but this says AM3, so they're not compatible with each other. So what you want to do is you want to get a motherboard that is AM4 compatible with your CPU. Now, I can't really show how to do Intel because I don't have an Intel motherboard. I'll do that in another video. But anyway, now with that out of our way, let's go get our parts. And with the magic of editing, case, CPU, RAM, GPU, motherboard, and last but not least, power supply. Okay, so now we got every single part here. We're ready to start assembling. And I have one thing to say about this motherboard. This motherboard took like a week and a half to get here. So I really hope you guys like this video because this thing took forever to ship. Okay, pause for a second. I know you want to continue the video, but I got one important thing to say about motherboards. So if you're getting a Ryzen 5 4500 and you're getting a motherboard that will support that CPU because they're both AM4, but it does say on the box that it's AMD 3000 or under processors ready, then it'll still fit your CPU just as long as they're both AM4 or AM3, etc. But the thing is, your motherboard's BIOS is not going to be updated enough to run that modern CPU. And what you would have to do is you would have to get the older CPU that's actually ready and update the motherboard's BIOS and then put your modern CPU back in. And I had to deal with that mess because I had to borrow my dad's CPU, and oh my god, that was a pain. But just continue with the video, and yeah. But anyway, let's get this wire and spaghetti all wired in, and let's get our PC running. So the first thing we'll be unboxing is our CPU, and it's pretty easy. I just pull up like that, okay? And I do want to mention I did open this before because I did want to remove that sticker and put it onto the case right here. Looks nice right there. But anyway, I'm guessing this is the cooler. Okay, we got the cooler. And we got our CPU, obviously. And then we got instructions and manuals. We don't need that. Now let's unbox our RAM. And this is 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. Because I just do want a nice gaming PC after a while. Because I've been stuck with DDR3. And trust me, that is slow. Or never mind, I was on the wrong side. I'm an idiot. Anyway, let's pull out our RAM. Okay, that's our RAM. In the GPU I already had, I pulled this out of an old computer, and this GPU is really good still, so I'm going to keep using this. And then this power supply I also had. I mean, I didn't want to buy a fully modular one because I didn't have enough money, so I found this one, and it's still pretty good. Sorry to interrupt your video again, but one more thing. If your CPU pins are 4-pin and you have an 8-pin connector, it'll still fit with each other. It'll still work. It's just you'll just have to plug it in a certain way. Well, you have to anyway. And also, if you get a fully modular power supply, where it's just plug and play, read the instructions manual, because that'll tell you where each cable should go on the power supply and the PC. And last but not least, we got our motherboard, so let's start unboxing it. Alright, so it just opens up like that, and I did not open this one yet, so it's gonna be a surprise. Alright, so right here, there's some stuff. Okay, this is our metal here, and we're gonna kind of need this. But it's not really necessary to put in your PC, but it adds a little extra design, so yeah. And what else do we have in here? Okay, this is our storage cable. Well, storage data cable, and I'll teach you about that in a minute. So let's get that out of here. Actually, let me just pull the motherboard out of here. Okay, there we go. Alright, and on the back, there should be some tape. Yep. And I'm gonna try just to gently rip it off. Gently rip it off. I'm gonna try gently. But it is a little tough to get out. Come on. Never mind, I can't do gently, but just give me a second. Okay, I am back now, and we got it open. So let's open her up. Okay, this motherboard don't actually look bad. It actually looks pretty good. Alright. We got a slot for a graphics card right there. And I know where the CMOS battery is now. Nice, brand new. That's what I like to see. And I'll unlatch this. Our CPU is ready to go in. But let's start assembling our parts. The first is the CPU, because I do kind of want to assemble that first. And we're assembling the cooler too. Alright, so let's carefully unlatch this. And when you have CPUs, you better be very careful with them, because it has all these pins on the bottom, and if you drop it like on metal or something, then it'll bend these pins, and it's not going to be usable. So you want to be very careful. And when you drop in your CPU in there, don't drop it in there. It should just slide right in. And if it doesn't slide right in, it's in the wrong orientation. So pick it up, flip it over, and okay, that ends up being the right rotation right there. And then make sure it's seated in properly. Okay, it's seated in. So now I can pull this to latch it. And now it's locked in and it's not going anywhere. Now let's install the cooler. Let's unbox it first. Okay. Alright, now we got the cooler here. And on this specific cooler, you do have pre-applied thermal paste. I kind of already touched it by accident, because I was just trying to see what it was, and it was thermal paste. But let's go ahead and install this cooler. So I tried fitting this cooler, and it doesn't have anywhere to screw into. So if this happens to you, don't worry, there is another way. I'm going to try to unscrew these brackets and try to fit it that way. Alright, so let's try unscrewing this. Let's just try unscrewing this, and hopefully that'll work that way. Alright, so our old cooler is, or actually not old cooler, but old brackets are out. Now let's try to test fit it again. And if it still doesn't fit, I do have the other ways, but I really hope it does. Oh man, that's not good. Okay, so it doesn't want to fit. Oh, never mind. Okay, now it does. I just turned it in the wrong orientation, see? Let's see if everything lines up, and it looks like it does. It looks like it'll fit in there nice and smooth. I just gotta screw it down. Yep, but make sure you align the holes, and the holes are aligned. So if your cooler doesn't fit, just remove these, and then you should be good to go. Now let's screw this in. Now when you're screwing in a CPU fan, I kind of like to do it in a crisscross pattern, so it'll screw down evenly, and that thermal paste will smooth down evenly. So let's get to work on that. I also forgot to mention that this backing plate will fall off of the bottom of the motherboard if you pick it up like this. So what I'm going to try to do, well, actually what you should do, is you just lay it on a flat surface, try to not move it as much, just line it up. Let me line up the bracket again, because okay, there we go. So you got to keep the motherboard on a flat surface for when you're tightening down this cooler, because or else the bracket will move, and then you won't be able to screw down the cooler to the motherboard. And this cooler should hold that bracket in place with the cooler, but that's what I'm hoping for. But let's find. Alright, now if I'm not mistaken, this cooler should hold the bracket in, and it does. Nice. That's perfect. Holds it in, the cooler's on there nice and tight, but not too tight to where it'll, yeah, you know. But anyway, now let's install our RAM. And I may just made another rookie mistake, because I realized that this AMD little thing is not gonna, the RAM is gonna hit this and collide with it. So I'm gonna have to unscrew this cooler again and turn it the other way, backwards, so the RAM can actually fit. It's okay if you do make this mistake. I mean, I made this mistake too. So let's just unscrew it and screw it back in. Alright, now it's time to install our RAM. Before I install this RAM, you may be asking yourself, why are you building it right here, right now, instead of putting it in the case first? Well, if you put it in the case first, it's going to be hard to build it because you're going to barely have any hand room. So it's important that you assemble it and out in the open first before you put it into your computer case. Enough talking, and let's get to business. And also, RAM, you could choose any, but there's some limits. So if you're getting a DDR4 motherboard, you gotta make sure you have DDR4 RAM. It's a pretty simple process. And if you have a DDR3 motherboard, then you have to get DDR3 RAM, because they can't mix and match. I'm sorry, it's just not how things work. Anyway, let's just install this RAM. And then when you're installing the RAM, it should just slide in. And make sure you pull these back so you can undo the clips. Then it should slide in like that, and then it should click. You should hear it click on the right, and then hear it click on the left. Alright, now it's nice in there, and let me install the second stick. And it barely just has enough clearance of the CPU fan, which is a good thing, because at least there's still clearance. That's all I care about. And make sure this little slot fits into the little slot right in here. Let me show you. Make sure it fits that little slot into this little slot. But anyway, let's install it. Now, when you're installing the GPU, you have two options. One, you can install a GPU like this, or if you have internal graphics built into the motherboard that are really good for gaming, then you could just use that instead. And that's probably why you probably have an HDMI port on your motherboard. And another rookie mistake, this brings me to another one. So when you're assembling this PC, and when you're getting done with it, and you install the GPU in here, don't use the HDMI port right here, because then the GPU is basically doing nothing. Instead, use the HDMI port on the GPU instead. And then you'll have some display. But in this case, I'm going to be installing an external GPU, because this is better than internal graphics. Don't ask why I know, or how I know. And then when you install it, it should just install pretty simply like this. It should just slide right in, and then it should be secured. And if your GPU needs like PCIe slot cables or slots, you got a fully modular power supply. It should come with these cables. They should be split into two like this, and these are your GPU cables. This is what plugs into your GPU. And the little 2-pin, well, maybe I'll be on the side as well. But if you don't have a fully modular power supply, then I can still help you with that too. And what's the difference between a fully modular power supply and a regular power supply, you may be asking? Well, here's a picture of a fully modular power supply. This allows you just to plug and play and you're good to go, but you're still not allowed to mix and match cables or else you're going to fry your... Don't worry, I'll tell you to what cable to what goes to what each. If you don't have a fully modular, like this one, this is not fully modular, then you don't know where the cables go, but I'll teach you where the cables go, and sometimes they might not even be marked. So don't worry, I'll still teach you of how to find the right cables, and you should be able to assemble this PC no problem, no lamo. Before we install the cables, we're going to need a SSD, but we'll install that later after we get this in the case, because this SSD is going in the case, like mine's already in the case, and then we'll just plug and play when we're ready to install the SSD. And usually you just install the SSD for when you have this already in the case. But let's go put her in the case because I think she's ready. Alright, so now let's put our motherboard here, and I changed my mind of how I installed the GPU. I'll just install it when I have it in the case. It's just easier that way. But anyway, let's grab our case. We're going to flip it over to its side, and then there should be 2 screws under here that you have to unloosen. And as soon as those are loose, you can just pull back, unlatch, and then this should open like that. It should open just like that. Alright, so if your motherboard hasn't come with any additional screws to screw this into the the case, in this point you can pretty much use any screw to screw this motherboard in. But let's go ahead and get it installed because I have the screws already, so I'll be good on that. First, we're gonna move this spaghetti out the way. We're gonna move it out the way so it doesn't collide with anything. And I'm gonna put this over here. Make sure all the wires are out of the way, including your system fan. I'm just gonna hang it over here. And these cables I'll just put over here where the power supply would go. And let's move away these cables. Now we're ready to install our motherboard. Alright, so let's go ahead and get her in. Line her up nice and smooth. And when you're lining it up, make sure it lines up with all the screws in your case. Just like that. Oh yeah, had to make sure you have an extra screw for your GPU to plug into. Well, not to plug into, but to screw onto the case so it doesn't budge. Unless if you're just using any internal graphics, then you don't have. Alright, so what I like to do is I like to screw this in, crisscross pattern, just like before. And let's start with this hole, this screw. And we'll screw it into the corner right there. Hand tighten it first. I always like to hand tighten it first. Then I go ahead and screw down. Just like that. There you go. Alright, now I'm going to go over to this hole right here and screw that in. Alright, let's get the bolt. Well, it's not really a bolt, it's a screw. I'm sorry, I just get things mixed up. Hand tighten it as much as I can. Then grab the screwdriver and then tighten it down. And after I'm done tightening the screw, I'm just gonna do time lapse for screwing down the rest of the screws, because you guys should know how to screw down these screws pretty easily without all my help. But let's time. Alright, real quickly, sorry to ruin the time lapse, but there is this one tough screw all the way up in the corner right there, and it is hard to get to, so I'm going to show you a few tips. One, you can remove your RAM stick so you have a little bit more room to work with. Or two, if your screwdriver is a little bit magnetic, you could do it like this, and then try to insert it that way. I feel like the second trick is the best, but the first trick always works as well. And bam, there we go. Now I got the screw in there, and let me just tighten it down, and let's continue the time lapse. Alright, so now we're done screwing everything in. Let's get that GPU. Alright, I think y'all should know how to install your GPU. Alright, and then when you're installing your GPU, make sure there's like an open slot, like right next to the GPU slot right here. Make sure there's a slot right here as well. So that way, you can access your ports and all. And it'll fit, so that way it'll fit as well. Sorry, I can't speak today. Alright, so click, and then click, and then now it's in. Now let's just screw it in. Alright, so I moved the camera over here so you can easily see it. And I'm going to also put my phone light like right over here, right by the CPU fan. So you can just kind of get a visual idea. And you can see well. And I'm going to have to hold my camera for this one. Because, I don't know. It's because this camera just won't bend farther enough. With the tripod and all. So, alright. So I got the screw in there. And now we just tighten it down. And when you're tightening down all these screws I mentioned in this video, you want to tighten them snug. But don't tighten them too tight. Or else you might strip them. Alright, so let's tighten it down until it's snug. And that should, alright, we're getting close to snug. It kind of takes a while to tighten down because it's kind of long. Alright, so that's getting close to snug. Alright, so let's just tighten a little bit more. Okay, now it's snug. Alright, so now let's install our SSD. Now, when you're choosing your SSD, you can either go for the one that just plugs into there very easily. You don't need no data cables for that. It will just plug and play, screw it down, and you're good to go. Or you could go for a solid state drive like the Samsung one, and just plug it in like that. And by the way, these SATA cables, there'll be multiple of these, and that's okay, because you can actually plug your solid state drive into any of these and it'll work. And now, when you're installing your SSD, I already have my data cable in, and the data cable should just pop in, and you should be able to find the first slot, and the first slot is actually right here, right in the corner. I don't know if you guys can see well. I'm going to try to tilt the camera a little bit more. Okay, that's perfect. Now, it should just slide in. Well, not slide in, it should just click in into place. Alright, so it's clicked in. Now we gotta give our SSD some power. So let's go ahead and do it. First, I forgot, we actually need to install our power supply. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so let's install this power supply. Alright, so it should just fit in like that. And also make sure there is no cables in the way. And when you're installing your power supply, there is really just two options, but you can either have the fan facing up, which is not really a good idea, trust me, or you can have it facing down, like I'm gonna do, so the air can just come in, and yeah, you know. But now let's just push this in. Ah, my phone fell. That's alright though, it happens. Anyway, let's just push it in. Make sure no wires are in the way, because sometimes they will be in your way, and it's kind of, you know, frustrating and all. Alright, now, when you're tightening down your power supply, there should be like 5 screws you have to tighten down. But I only have 2, so we're going to have to make that work. But anyway, let's screw her in and let's do the time lapse. Alright, now that it's nice and tightened in, we're going to have to do a lot of cable management. Like, I mean a lot. Well, not completely a lot, but we're going to have to arrange these cables. And I kind of hate doing that, but it's life, so we gotta. Alright, so the first thing to do when you're arranging your cables is, you see these little holes right here, you could just fit them through there and all. But you also want to unscrew the panel from the other side of the computer, so you have access to the other side. And this is where all your wires is gonna go, is on the back of it. And that's where all these wires are. So let's go wire up let's go arrange the rest. So first, let's start off with our motherboard cables. So what I'm going to do to manage it and kind of keep it out of the way is I'm going to push it through this hole right here, this open space. And I'm going to have to flip it over and get access, then pull it through. But it also needs to go to the motherboard. Alright, so just like that. And you may want to have some zip ties with you. Zip ties is going to help you manage these cables. And now I'm just going to push them over to this other slot right here. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad right there. And while you're managing your cables, you might as well plug them in. And I'm going to teach you that, don't worry. So this is going to be your motherboard cables. It should look like this. And most of the time it's 24 pins. And it is 24 pins, and that's what this motherboard is. You may want to look up how many pins your motherboard requires. And in this case, it's 24. So we just have to push it in. Make sure it clicks. There we go. Now let's plug in our 4-pin into here as well. And gotta click. And now it's nice and secure in there. And it's not budging on anything. Now let's go to our CPU cable. And now when we're talking about CPU cables should just have a single cable like this. With maybe 6 pins or 8 pins. Sometimes they may like some companies split the 2 pins right here and just move it aside, and that's completely fine. But I recommend getting these types of cables because they're just easier. And when you're putting in your CPU cables, now this CPU cable should go on the top left right here. And on the top left, there is a port for it. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Alright, now it's nice and plugged in. And I already rearranged it. I put it through the hole and everything. So yeah, we're good there. Now, since our GPU doesn't have any cables, it's alright if it doesn't. Now, we could just sneak these under the hole and just kind of move it out of the way since we don't need these. We're going to need these in the future, probably. But not right now because our GPU doesn't have those slots. Remember, it's totally okay if your GPU doesn't have those slots because it's completely fine. But if it does, remember, your GPU cables is going to look like this. It's going to be split into 2 like this, into a 6 pin, to another 6-pin, and now plug it into your GPU. But I haven't taught you for where you're supposed to plug and play for a fully modular power supply. So let me show you the picture now. That is the fully modular power supply I showed you earlier. And now, when you're plugging in a GPU cable or whatever, the GPU cable must go on the PCIe slots. That's where your GPU is going to be, on the PCIe slots. Plug it into that. And then obviously plug the CPU cable into the CPU slot into the power supply. And then plug it into the motherboard. And those SATA and IDE cables, the IDE cables are like for accessories, like for RGB fans, and maybe or maybe just like your system fans and stuff like that. But the SATA cables are for your SSD. Unless if you're using the SSD that just plugs straight into the motherboard without any cables, then of course you don't need those SATA cables. But those SATA cables are for a solid state drive, which is the SSD. And just remember that. And also, if you're trying to plug a cable into your SSD, it should just fit in. It should just fit in with no budges, just like that. And there may be multiple that they fit into your SSD, but don't worry, you can mix and match them. Don't worry, they'll just find their way. And to screw the SSD in, you should know how to do that. But just make sure I get these cables out of the way first. They're always in my way. Kind of hate that, but yeah, get that out of here. Okay, and then when they're out of your way, you can just slide it in like. You should be able to slide it in like so. These cables are not in my way. Hold on. I'm gonna kill these cables if they don't stop getting in the way. But anyway, you should just slide in. And then you should be able to screw it down. There's 2 screws, and then it's screwed in. Okay, I know this is not the nicest cable management, but I'll do some more after we're done wiring up everything. So let's start with the system fans. So with the system fans, if you have like if you have like ports like see like this one right here, it says sys fan 1. That means it's your system fan, and you can match them up like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 or 3 and 2. It doesn't matter, but let's just plug it in. Okay, so now that this system fan is plugged in, I'm gonna make sure it's out of the way, so I'm gonna sneak it down here. And I'm actually gonna install that metal mesh to have like some extra style to it. Let me just unbox this real quick. Alright, so when you're installing your metal mesh, it should just go in, it should just plug and play, like it should just clip right in. And I think I go up first. That's usually what I do, or sometimes I hold the sides. Sometimes it can be a little bit tough to get in because it's kind of tight in here. I mean, it's supposed to be. That's how it fits pretty good. Man, this is difficult. Well, just give me a second, guys. Okay, forget about that. It's tough. And now, since we have another system fan here, there should be another set of pins that says system fan 2. But if it doesn't, don't worry. Fan will usually have these types of cables, like these types of cables. And for that, I just plugged it in into one of these cables. Just as long as it fits, it's good to go. Oh man, we're getting very close to booting up the system, but we gotta add some additional things. Alright, so now we gotta add our HD audio. Now this one is actually pretty easy to do. You just gotta find to where it says F audio, that means front audio, and that's where you wanna plug this into. The HD audio should just plug in, like, pretty simple. Just push it in a little bit. Make sure, and you shouldn't have to dang it, why do I keep repeating myself? You shouldn't have to push this in hard. It should just go in there, just like that. Well, hold on. Well, if it doesn't go in right, try flipping it around, because flipping it around does work. And, yep, there we go. Okay, now it's in. Now that our audio's in, let's plug in the front USBs. And for them to work, it should say front USB 1. Front USB 1 is right here. So we plug it into the first one. Always plug it into the first one. And if you have a second additional of USBs, then yeah, you can plug it into the second one. And now you kind of get the deal. So let's plug her in. push it down just a little bit. It may need some, like a little bit of force sometimes. Sometimes it won't go in there all the way. But now we got it. Now the front panel pins. Now this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky, but I have a trick to make it easy. So first you want to grab your power switch cable. And the power switch cable, all you need to do to identify that is just to grab like any 2-pin cable and then just follow that. And that goes into my power switch right there. So I clearly know this is the power switch cable. And the power switch cable usually goes on these 2 front pins right here. Like these 2 front pins. Let me plug it in for you. It should just go into those 2 pins right just like that. And now let's start with your LEDs. LED cables usually goes right by the power switch cables. But first we need to always plug in the negative one first. Now we plug in the positive one, if my camera can focus, right by it. And now we have our LED cables. It should just look like that. And now let's install the other stuff. In this case, I have this cable and then one more cable. First, let's install the blue one, which is the reset. And if these have the letterings on it, then that'll be very useful for you. Trust me, it will. And usually it just goes on the left right here, which I'm pretty sure of. And if I'm wrong, don't worry, it won't spark, it won't damage your PC. You just have to flip it around and then you'll be good to go. And now let's just plug it into there and plug it right there. And that's how it should look like. And if it doesn't work, then just swap the blue and the red and then you should be good to go. Don't worry, it's not going to spark. Alright, now the wiring is complete. Now, for the question we all been waiting for. Will I be able to start this PC in the first try? Let's go find out. Alright, this moment is the best moment. Everything's plugged in, everything's wired. And before you start up your PC, make sure you double check everything. Because if you don't, you might mess up something. But don't be worried. Because if you're worried, then you're going to mess up something. Whew, man. Alright. I'm ready to start her up. Oh, man, I am nervous. I don't know. I'm just nervous. And when that red LED comes up, that's still a good sign. That means your CMOS battery is working. That means everything in here is working. Oh, man. Alright, let's go. Alright. We got her started up on the first try. Okay, everything's running smooth. Everything's running great. Alright, that's what I like to see. And alright, and I noticed this GPU is actually a little bit low, and that's not good on the pin, so I'm gonna fix that right away. But oh man, I love it to see it started. Oh, that's just amazing. Alright, and now you know how to build your own PC. Make sure you subscribe, and if you want more tips or if I missed something, make sure to let me know down in the comments and I'll include those. But oh man, this is exciting. I got her started on the first try. And even the LED's working. I'm pretty sure the front USB works too and the audio. But man, that is exciting. Alright, now I'm gonna go play with this thing and definitely adjust that GPU because it's low and that's probably damaging the pin. So let me just do that real quick. But yeah, alright, see you guys later.